others, people who weren't just interested in him in some sort of financial way.
There's no record of that.
He's quite a lonely character, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, probably a pretty tough guy to be around, only a little bloke, but tough, but all his men respected him.
It's a very difficult thing to keep pushing his men into this incredibly tough environment. I think they all went way beyond the call. And the physical hardship they endured.
Way beyond the call. And that goes back to your question, why did he do it? What was in it for him? Yeah, way beyond the call of most men. And he was successful.
The night skies here in the desert are simply beautiful. They lend everything a timeless quality that somehow brings Stuart much closer. You wake early in the desert, the sun and the glass keep you up. You also want to get up and wash before the flies become too much of a nuisance. I like to make time in the morning to get myself organised and to prepare for the day ahead. As I said, my aim isn't to follow Stuart's crossing of the country, but to visit some of the places that were key to him gaining his bush knowledge and experience that allowed him to make that journey. One of the things I really like to do is to look at my route on a survey map. At the beginning of each day, I'll check where I'm going so that when I'm driving along, I have a better understanding of what I'm passing by. And I'm very lucky because most of Australia now is extremely well mapped. But of course, back in Stuart's day, it was largely a blank sheet of paper. You can see here how I've got my maps organised. I've numbered each sheet that I'm going to need for the whole journey, so I can find my way to them very easily. It also means that I won't lose track of them. I know that if number 5's not there, to look for it and find it. I don't want to lose anything. I can't suddenly pop into the shop. And that's exactly how it was for Stuart. He was an absolute stickler for having his whole equipment really well organised. His bags were numbered, and every piece of equipment had its place. Of course, it wasn't just about being able to find the pieces of equipment he needed when he needed them. It was about not losing them, because this man was travelling very light. Virtually every piece of equipment he had was essential. Before departing on my trip, Rick arranged for me to spend some time looking at Stuart's personal belongings, kept here at the History Trust store in Adelaide. This is the kit he built up and refined over his many early explorations, and would have been with him on his eventual crossing of the country. I feel honoured to be granted permission and hope it will shed some light on Stuart's method of exploration. This is a real privilege. On the table here I've got some of the items that are held in collections here in Australia from Stuart's expeditions. It's fascinating to have a look at them. One of Stuart's men was a man called Keckwick, and this was his mug. When I travel, I have one mug I take everywhere with me. I'm sure it was the same for him. It becomes a very personal item to use every day. And that mug would have been designed, if I'm very, very careful, that folds in. And that was designed to fit inside a billy can for cooking. Amazing. But perhaps most interesting of these personal items is this scarf ring made of red coral. That was John McDouall Stuart's, and it's in the shape of a dragon. I wonder what Aboriginal people thought of when they saw that. And this is John McDouall Stuart's belt. This tells us a lot about the man. He was very slim, and I could barely get that around my thigh. I mean, it's quite astonishing, fascinating. Navigation was, of course, critical on these expeditions, and it's interesting to note the quality of his navigational equipment. The compass was a tool he was completely happy and comfortable with. His first expedition was carried out merely by dead reckoning, knowing his distance and bearings. So to hold his compass and look through there and take a reading, well, it's a bit chilling, actually. And it's really moving to hold that compass because you know what that meant to him. Later on, he used a more accurate means of navigation of fixing his position on the land surface, which was necessary if the interior of Australia was to be accurately mapped. And for that he used a sextant, and this is his sextant. It's a well-made sextant with a micrometer reading on the bottom here, and it shows the commitment to accurately recording where he'd gone. His observations would of course be written down, and this is one of the notebooks from 1862, and it's interesting that when you read it from this direction, the observations are of two types. We have lunar observations and sun observations to establish his longitude by working out the local apparent noon. And when you read it from the other direction, there are his latitude observations, all beautifully recorded here in a light copper-plate script. That's very, very special. But I guess of all of the equipment that I'm looking at here, the things that have intrigued me most have been the binocular and the telescope and his spurs. I think these things are very interesting. These are his binoculars, the French binoculars. They're good quality binoculars, they're still functioning today, and they're very light. Optics were tremendously important for him in scanning the landscape and searching for water, and the way he would look for that was to get up early in the morning and scan with a telescope. The optics are of good quality, but they're very light. Very, very light, and that's reflected also, that concept, in his spurs. Look how delicate these spurs are. That's incredible. This was a man who, in his mind, believed in travelling light and fast, and his equipment very much reflects that. I've been looking at this, thinking about the equipment that I take on a trip into the desert, and thinking, well, maybe my binoculars give me better vision, but they're heavy compared to those. Lightness is something that as you get older, I think you come to value more and more, and it's something that he really understood. And that's the abiding impression I'm left with from his equipment was how simple his outfit must have been, how well made it was. It's robust, but it's all epitomising his concept, light and fast. This travel light and fast approach was adopted by Stuart after a failed 18-month expedition in 1844. Captain Charles Sturt led the way. He travelled like many early explorers, taking everything that they thought they needed with them. Burdened by all their equipment and a flock of sheep, they moved very slowly. Stuart, having seen the error in the method, came up with a plan. He was convinced that you could explore this land, taking only the bare essentials and a few good men on horseback, travelling from sun-up to sundown. His early trips into the then uncharted land were invaluable. Stuart taught himself what to look for, learning as he went, banking the knowledge needed to survive out here. He would use his bush skills to find a drink, going where the water led him. To the untrained eye, it would seem that finding water here would be nigh on impossible. But Stuart had the uncanny knack of wringing a drink out of this sunburnt landscape. We know that Stuart took good optics with him on his expeditions. He took binoculars, which are convenient and very easy to use, and with which he could scan ahead looking for any indication of water, maybe a particularly green or bushy tree down a creek, or wildlife, birds that could indicate the presence of water, pigeons, kangaroos. Kangaroos dig in some of these creeks for water. And the thing that really intrigued me is the fact he was carrying a telescope with him. The telescope gives you much greater magnification, and we know that he would go in the morning onto high points when there was less mirage, less heat haze, take the telescope and scan the country ahead, looking for any possible source of water, because that's the means by which he navigated. And picture the scene. Steady now, telescope. Focus it. And then very carefully follow the creek lines, studying them for anything that could indicate the presence of water. You can very easily discern now bushes that are particularly green and verdant. And with a telescope like this, you can look into the bush and see the presence of bird life. And having done that, He could then send other members of his team out to scout ahead, send them down the creek lines to survey it, saying, pay particular attention over there because I think that might be a good place for water. By that means, he very quickly could build up an accurate impression of where the water was so that he could navigate via reliable sources of water. That's what was unique about Stuart's approach. He followed the water rather than hoping it would be where he wanted to go. In this vast land, Stuart couldn't have done what he did without horses. They had the stamina and reliability to travel the distances needed as he surveyed the landscape. His life literally depended upon them. To preserve the horses, Stuart set off early in the mornings, setting a steady pace as they rode for hours across the baking interior. Their needs always came first at the end of the day. No one could eat or drink until they'd been tended to. Today, the mode of transport has changed to four-wheel drives, but actually the same rules apply. When you're travelling in this sort of country, you need to inspect your tyres on a regular basis. Make sure you've got the appropriate tyre pressures and look for any signs of wear. These rocks here, they're not just hard, they're also very sharp. Of course, not much has changed since when little Stuart came through. Back then, it wasn't tyres, it was horseshoes. And on his second expedition, he made a major mistake. He didn't take enough horseshoes with him, and 100 kilometres north of here, he had to turn back. You can imagine, can't you? If your horse goes lame out here, you're as good as dead. The searing heat can play strange tricks on the mind and the eye. Stuart was to learn this the hard way on Captain Charles Sturt's expedition. Slowed to a standstill by all their kit, Stuart was sent to scout ahead for water, and after 4 days in the saddle, his weary eyes met with a very welcome sight of a huge lake in the distance. He returned with the triumphant news, but his elation would turn to disappointment, as it turned out that he had been deceived by a mirage. He vowed never to let this happen again, and wrote, "The mirage is so powerful that little bushes appear like great gum trees. One would think that the whole country was underwater." One of the best ways of getting water in a desert in an emergency is by use of something called a transpiration bag. To do this, you're going to need a big polythene bag. You have to have that with you already. But here in Australia, there's a real advantage. What I'm going to do is going to try and trap the moisture being transpired from these leaves by covering a branch in a plastic bag. Some trees will give out chemicals called alkaloids into the water and make it toxic. But eucalypts don't do that. And that's one of the great advantages for this technique here in Australia. What I'm looking for is a fairly bushy branch on this sapling that's facing north, so it's going to get good sun. And I'm going to need to trim it up a little bit, get rid of some of the excess branches that I don't need. This far south in the southern hemisphere, the sun passes from east to west with the sun to the north, so that's why I'm careful to choose a north-facing branch. It really pays to take your time, getting as many of the branches in as possible so that you can trap as much of the life-giving water that this bush will transpire. Careful not to puncture the bag. It needs to be airtight. Seal that end as well as possible. So, I've got quite some length to tie that firmly. I'll leave that long so that I have to retie that first. Now, come at this end. So, there's the transpiration bag set up, what I've created here is a reservoir to collect the water by just narrowing the bag here. And what I'm going to do now is adjust this cord so this is hanging down at the lowest point. So I've rigged that, so this is right at the bottom. The gravity will lead any moisture down into there. Good. You can already start to see moisture forming on the inside of the bag as the tree transpires. It's like a greenhouse, trapping all the moisture transpired from the leaves, and then that finds its way down in here. And of course I can shake it and tap some of the moisture so it'll run down. So we're just going to leave that now in the sun. Do this for a floor. I've got a hole there, but that's not good. The gaffer tape from the crew here. As the sun climbs, the heat rises towards 40 degrees and the transpiration bag begins to work. The leaves perspire and release their precious, life-giving moisture. On arriving at camp for the night, Stuart had a strict routine he adhered to. Whilst he made the most of the remaining daylight, writing up his precious charts and journal, his men would unpack the saddlebags, hobble the horses, and collect wood for the camp fire. Their firelighting kit reflected Stuart's philosophy of travelling the light. Rick has been given special permission to bring along the firelighting kit of the artist Stephen King, who accompanied Stuart on a number of his journeys. This was Stephen King's kit, Stuart, that he carried.
So this is how you make fire, just simple gear, using rudimentary equipment.
That's very interesting. There's a little brass tube to contain it, and a striker and a piece of flint, and this intriguing tube. Now, this is the first time I've seen this, but of course I've seen photographs and drawings of it, Rick, and what I've done back in the UK is I've gone into my shed and I've replicated this. And I'll show you what I've made. I think I've come pretty close, actually. That's what I've knocked up.
It's very similar.
It's very close, and I haven't actually seen the original. But there is one thing I've added to it that I think you're going to find very interesting. What I've done is I've put in a cord. This is a cotton cord, which I've impregnated with saltpeter. And I think that is what that tube from King's apparatus was used for. And if I bring that charred end out and show you that.
Yep.
There's a charred end. If I can get a spark to land in the right place. There, like that. Because this has got the saltpeter, it glows like a slow match. That won't go out. Anyway, that won't go out. That's going to keep going. Give this a go then, shall we, Rick? There's our fire. Now, the clever thing about the tube is that you can pull that down and you place your finger over the top of the tube and then it starts in oxygen and out it goes. But I think that's what you have in this kit here. But Rick, King's firelighting apparatus is quite well travelled, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more than quite well travelled, it's extraordinarily travelled, because not only did it go from south to north, the first European crossing across the continent, Dr. Andy Thomas, who's a descendant of F.G. Waterhouse, who was the naturalist on the last and final expedition of Stuart's, took this as a memento when he went to the Space Shuttle Endeavour in 1996, so it's pretty well travelled. He was here, right at this very spot, and it was on the north coast of Australia. And then about 145 years later, it was Andy's personal memento as Australia's only astronaut on Space Shuttle Endeavour.
That's amazing. That is incredible, isn't it? It was probably used right here.
Absolutely.
Right here. And then it goes off.
And it's come back and it's intact. That's pretty special, isn't it?
Okay, time to see if I have enough for a life-saving drink. So let's have a look at the transpiration bag, and I'm really pleased with that result. In fact, the reservoir hasn't been big enough. There's a good amount of water here, and a lot more that I can tap down off the glass. This is my choice of technique for an emergency here. You can have 20 or 30 of these bags stashed away in an off-road vehicle without any difficulty, should the need arise. And all you have to do is put them on the road and let the sun do the rest. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to see how much there is in there. Normally you'd save the bag, open it carefully, but I don't have to. And I'm just going to cut it and see what the score is. Go on. We nearly got, yes. My mug's calibrated, and that's half a litre of liquid for virtually no effort whatsoever. Decent quantity, just thanks to this bush and the power of Mother Nature herself, the sun. Cheers. Even tastes good. Well, it can happen to anyone. This may look like a setup, but believe me, no one wants to get bogged down out here. However, it does give me the chance to show you how to get out of a similar situation. Having had extensive experience of travelling off-road in this country, I made sure that one of our vehicles was fitted with a winch. But we still have to dig down and place branches under the tyres to give us purchase on a very soft sand bed. John, could you do this? So you're like everything's zipped in your face now? Yeah. Okay guys, line cable. I've seen a winch cable break under strain before, and believe me, it's extremely dangerous. The pressure on the cable is greatest near to the vehicle that is being winched. If it snaps, it will whip back. As a precaution, we wrap a swag around the middle to prevent this whipping action that could be lethal. The key is to be patient and to winch slowly, taking up the slack. Too fast, and we will get bogged down again. Very unfortunate to get stuck there. Came down here last night in the dark, tired, a little bit dehydrated, made a poor decision. Looked down the slope, and I could see where there'd been a campfire, and I could also see roots of the trees. So I thought, oh, that must be hard sand. Drove down there. As soon as I got in, I realised it was soft. And I popped out on the underside of the vehicle. But we're fortunate we got one of the vehicles set up with a winch. Here's a little tip. When you're winching, you tie your shackle on. You fix your shackle on. Like so. You do it up. A lot of people do it up really tight. The problem with that is by the time you've loaded the vehicle and you've pulled it out, it can have tightened and you can't get the thing undone. So once you've got it up, just undo a fraction. It's still going to hold tight once there's load on there, but it means when you get out, you can easily undo it. Little things like that make all the difference. Reminders of the harsh reality of living in such an environment are never far away. Travelling in vehicles can lull you into a false sense of security, but step out into the blistering heat of the day, and it's not long before you are reaching for the water bottle. It's hard to imagine what drove Stuart to return time and again to the desert, venturing further and further into this arid land, often not knowing where the next drink was coming from. No matter how dehydrated and exhausted from lack of sleep, and nourishment, he never veered away from his task of mapping out the great swathes of uncharted land. Stuart became incredibly adept at finding water out here, but even he wasn't prepared for what he saw one evening on his second expedition. Climbing a hill, he saw stretching out before him a series of hills with water springing out of the top of them. He had discovered a line of mound springs that would become essential to his later expeditions. He wrote in his journal, "This is another strange feature of the mysterious interior of Australia."
Well, that's completely weird. I've come uphill to a waterhole. It seems like nature turned upside down. It's quite incredible. This is a mound spring. I've heard a lot about these, but it's a bit of a surprise when you come here. This was a very important place for John McDouall Stuart. This was permanent water that he could rely upon, and it was from here that he really kicked off on his proper expeditions. Amazing. It's pretty salty, but it was good enough for John McDouall Stuart, I guess. Good enough for me to take the opportunity to top up the old water bag. Hard to imagine, really, what this must have been like. Riding across here on a horse would have been like crossing the lunar landscape. So to come to one of these raised points and find all this water must have been a fantastic experience, both for man and for horse. These canvas water bags are an ancient tool of Australia. In fact, I guess in some ways they're falling into disuse because people have such good refrigerators inside their off-road vehicles today. The basic principle is that the bag's wet and you tie it on the outside of your vehicle or on your horse or even bicycles, believe it or not. And as you go along, the breeze causes an evaporation on the surface. It keeps the fluid cool inside. Brilliant tool. It's a special place to be. Kind of get a sense of John McDouall Stuart here, getting ready for the journey ahead.
As a permanent source of water, the springs played a key role in Stuart's exploration of the interior. Mound spring expert Colin Harris is researching the springs in the area.
Colin, when I first saw these mound springs, I thought nature had turned itself upside down. I mean, you walk up the slopes of this thing to find a waterhole. It's bizarre. Can you tell me how it forms, how they come about?
Well, the simplest description of them is that they're natural outlets for the waters of the Great Artesian Basin. So it's groundwater which is bubbling to the surface under pressure. The Great Artesian Basin is a huge basin. It covers about a fifth of the Australian continent. Most of the underground water in the basin has come from the Great Dividing Range up in northern Queensland. It's got down into water-bearing gravels and sands and sandstones, various aquifers, and it moves very, very slowly southwards. So that the water we're seeing here is probably been moving through the basin at the rate of about 1 to 3 metres a year, which makes it a couple of million years old. So the water in front of us here today is really fossil water. It's been around for a long, long time. Because it's moving through the aquifers so very, very slowly, it's picking up a lot of dissolved solids as it goes. So as soon as the water emerges, lots of those dissolved solids start precipitating out, and they concentrate over time and start forming these cones and the typical mound that we see behind us.
So, tell me about John McDouall Stuart's association with the mound springs.
Yeah, well, they were absolutely critical to Stuart. Without the mound springs, Stuart, at his own admission, would never have got across this inhospitable part of the continent. I mean, where we are today is the harshest part of the Australian continent. The lowest rainfall is erratic. You'll get years sometimes with negligible rain or almost no rain at all. It was an almost insurmountable obstacle to crossing the continent, which was a great strategic objective. And Stuart, once he got onto the line of mound springs up here, realised that he would then be able to get unfailingly into the centre of Australia, pick up the big gum creeks, and then move into the subtropics and on through the coast, and ultimately, of course, that's what he did in '62. And he comments time and again in his journals about the fact that without the mound springs, he would never have achieved what he did. And in the annals of Australian exploration, Stuart is right there with the best of them.
I mean, the thing I find fascinating is he comes into this country and there's already a technology here for finding water with an Aboriginal perspective. But he brings a new perspective on the whole issue. It's almost like, yeah, well, they do it their way, I'm going to find another way. And I have huge respect for that. I think that was really unusual.
The springs were an incredible life-saving find. However, the minerals in the salty water caused Stuart and his men many stomach problems. Resourceful as ever, Stuart had an answer.
This big billy can here is a water heater. It's ideal for my purposes because it has a spout. The way it works is there's this big funnel. It's a really good idea. The only way you can get water out is to put cold water in. So you put cold water in, it goes to the bottom, and it forces hot water out of the side pipe. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the water to the boil, and then I'm just going to keep it simmering. I don't want it bubbling and spewing salt water out through that pipe. I'm going to attach to that a pipe so that I can condense the steam and get fresh drinking water. Now, I've bought a piece of plastic hose pipe with me. I've just made a coil there. The idea is that steam will feed into this pipe. I'll have this suspended, and I'm going to put a bandage around this and make that wet. And the wind blowing across the bandage will cause evaporation, which will cool the air inside these tubes. So as the steam comes in, it condenses, forms into a liquid, and runs down, and that should be fresh drinking water.
Of course, in order to use the still, you have to have found water in the first place. Stuart was lucky to find such a permanent source of water in the Mound Springs. Many other explorers seeking new pastoral lands and gold and minerals weren't so lucky. There are plenty of chilling reminders of this.
You know, you can never take desert travel lightly, and nowhere is that more the case than here in Australia. At the moment, I'm inside the Royal Geographical Society of South Australia. I've come here because there's an interesting collection of artifacts from expeditions of the past. Simple things like this water canteen that was found in the desert, but scratched in the outside of this tin is the last testament of William Coulthard. He scratched these words as he lay dying in the desert of dehydration. It's difficult to read now, but it says, "I never reached water. I do not know how long it is since I left Scott and Brooks. But I think it Monday, leaving Pop his horse to live on his blood. I took his horse to look for water, and the last thing I can remember is pulling the saddle off him and letting him go. Until now, he's not good. Long it may weather 2 or 3 days, I do not know. I am not sure. My tongue is sticking to my mouth, and I see what I have wrote, and know, as this is the last time I may have of expressing feelings blind, although feeling exude for want of water, my eyes to my tongue, I can see no way I can help.
This land also claimed the lives of 2 of Australia's best-known explorers, Burke and Wills. They went head-to-head with Stuart when he eventually decided to employ all of his acquired knowledge to the task of crossing Australia. They were chasing fame and fortune offered to the first Europeans to cross the continent. The government were keen to find a route for an overland telegraph linking north to south, improving trade and communications. They took a very different approach to Stuart, taking everything that they thought they needed with them. This amounted to 20 tons of equipment, 27 heavily laden camels, and 23 horses. They even brought along a wooden dining table. But the desert would claim their lives. Less than a year after setting off, they were down to just 3 men and 2 camels. They had practically no bushcraft knowledge, and unable to process the food they found properly, broken wills perished.
Well, let's see how this has been going. It's been burning now for 4 hours, and the difficulty with this technique is always here. It's always in the cooling. This is very, very hot, despite the breeze causing good evaporation. Well, that's really not too bad. I told you that it was a difficult technique. It's a lot of work for your return, but it works. You can take salty water and get drinking water from it. And there is a drink there. I mean, that's not bad going at all. As the sun goes down, this will become more efficient because the ambient temperature will drop, and then we'll get proper cooling here, and we'll get an even higher yield. It's a lot of work. You have to have a lot of water to get very little, but there's enough. And this is a practical means of turning saline water into drinking water. And it was a system similar to this that Stuart took with him on some of his expeditions.
Stuart embraced the challenge of finding water. Once he found a reliable source, he would carefully plot it and then plan his future journeys around its location. True to his character, he chose to do it in his own way. He took little guidance from the Aboriginal people who had lived off the land for thousands of years. Reg Dodd, coordinator of the Arabana People's Committee, has agreed to give me an Aboriginal perspective.
The Aboriginal people who were living here on the desert, their lifestyle was around the management and caring and looking after that land. Their whole survival depended on that. Their upbringing and teaching gave them the skill and knowledge to survive on this land. And people would come along and say, it's an arid land, there's nothing like here, what's here? But you would have knowledge that nothing handed down by generation to generation after generation. You would know where to look for water, where to look for fine food. So I'm just going to show you where you can find the water. This is where one of our rock holes are. So it's pretty precious. So I'll just remove that. That. Then. Wow, that's amazing.
That really is incredible out here.
So take that, you can take that. Lovely.
Wow, it's amazing. I've been tasting mountain springs and boreholes, and they're very brackish. That's very sweet.
Yeah. And the more you clean it, the more you use it, the sweeter it gets in it.
The more you use it, the sweeter it gets. So you don't empty that and they refill.
Cool. Do you mind if I fill my water bottle? You can.
Without Reg, I would never have known there was a water source out here, and it's so much nicer than the water Stuart and his men would have been drinking. As with so many indigenous people, it was the Aboriginals who paid the price for progress and exploration.
Those early explorers who came through this country, they didn't know where the special places were, did they?
No, they wouldn't. No. They would have been travelling over, camping, and probably venturing on places where there was restrictions placed only for men or women. So they wouldn't have done that. They would have been totally ignorant. How did your people feel about that? I think in many places it creates conflict in that because of the restriction of who could go on those places and why. See? And in many places where you had, they would have had animals and had to stock on that, and that stock would have been trampling and treading and destroying that native vegetation that provided medicine and food for the average people.
And where we are at this moment, that's a special place.
It is a very, very special place. Just behind us there now is a stone table, and it would be thousands of years old, carved out of the rock by the old people. And this area we're looking at here now is actually a ceremonial place where the warriors became men. It's a very important place.
But despite the importance of this site, there's a railway just next to it.
Exactly, yeah. And that railway corridor travels right through the heart of this very significant place for Aboriginal people. So the impact of that would be enormous. Not only was it the railway, but it was the construction of the overland telegraph line, 1871. So it would have had an enormous impact.
Obviously, we're making a documentary about John McGill Stewart. What are your thoughts about that?
I often think that the early explorers and the pioneers were actually the beginning of the end of that Aboriginal culture.
In his journals, he describes an event when he's crossing the land and he meets an Aboriginal family who take him to one of these small wells that they've dug. And he comes along with his horses, and all the horses drink the water. And the Aboriginal man looks at him with astonishment. How do you think that man was feeling at that moment?
Of course, it would have been an enormous impact because that water is so precious to him. Right? So the animal just coming in there, just walking in there and destroying it, and it's probably in place it would be sacrilege, you know, creating a sacrilege.
I have heard a similar story so many times on my travels, and it never gets any easier or more comfortable to deal with. There's even less water in the creeks and rivers of Australia today than when Stewart crossed here. One tip for finding a drink Stewart may have been glad of in desperate times was discovered through research carried out by the Australian Army.
These are one of the features of this part of the world. You get these lizards called shingle-back lizards. You can see this incredible scaling on their back here. Aboriginal people would eat these for food. You can't actually drink the liquid from the bladder of these creatures because they excrete most of their salts in their dung. Not a very nice idea. Much better than let this little chap walk free. But if you were walking around out here without a drink, I don't think there'd be any hesitation. Here you go, fella. You wouldn't want to get bitten by one. They've got a fierce bite. They really flatten your finger.
As we finished recording this piece, it began to rain, but this lasted for just 5 minutes. A torment for everyone who's living here under drought conditions. A powerful reminder how desperate this land is for a drink. Travelling this land, Stewart and his men spent hours in the saddle with the wind, dust and the glare of the sun taking its toll on their eyes. Stewart in particular suffered from sandy blight or trachoma caused by grit under the eyelids. It's still a problem for those living in the outback today. Sometimes it was so bad that Stewart was unable to leave the camp. On one occasion he wrote, "Nearly blind, dreadful pain, can do nothing today. No sleep last night." But he never gave up, and through relentless example pushed his men hard in the fierce heat of the interior.
The more I see of the terrain that John McGill Stewart crossed, the more impressed I become. It truly is one bleak savanna landscape. It's incredible. He traversed this in the hope of finding water, confident somehow that he would. And every so often, he had that life-saving success. There's an old saying that explorers need more than just skill, they need a degree of luck. And he certainly had that all-important ingredient.
The final place I want to visit is a creek that became as important strategically to Stewart as the Mound Springs. It provided a reliable source of water in such an arid area. He would return to the creek many times in his explorations, allowing him to forge further north, finally using it as a jumping off point to take on water before his crossing of the continent.
Here
I'm looking forward to recreating the sort of camp that Stuart would have lived in, on the very spot where he would have pitched his tent. He must have pinched himself when he came across this green, verdant valley in the middle of all this desolation. Big trees, and just like today, there's open water. This became Chambers Creek and was of huge significance in the exploration of Australia and of intense interest amongst those who wanted to run cattle in this country. Today, it's called Stuart Creek in memory of John McGill Stuart, and it's not easy to get to. In fact, even driving here in a car today is still a fantastic sight that raises your spirits when you see all that open water, fresh drinking water. So this is where we're to end our journey. It's quite something to know that Stuart camped here, in a tent very similar to this. It only takes a few minutes to put up. In this heat, you really want something that is light and easy, because Stuart would rarely have stayed in one place for very long. Stuart's original tent doesn't survive. We've had this one reconstructed from field sketches made on Stuart's last expedition by Stephen King. Really gives a sense of place here, and it's very good shade, which is welcome today. Tarps are very simple in their construction. To sit under this tarp, which is very similar to the one Stuart used, I get a sense of how he would have looked out on the world while he was sitting, using calculations on his journeys, noting down where he'd been, hypothesizing where it might next find water, instructing his men where to go. What better way to cool off than having a dip in the creek? It's too hot not to get in, I have to say. Oof. Stuart was very strict with his men, and rations were no different. Remember, his philosophy was to travel fast and light. They lived on a simple regime of jerk beef, tea, and damper, the bread that I'm making here. It feels very special to sit here, making this staple of his diet, exactly as Stuart would have done, listening to the welcome sounds of the birds and the fresh water nearby. The creek and the surrounding country will have changed very little since he camped here. You can almost feel his presence, and it's not hard to imagine him sitting here by his fire in the fading light, meticulously recording his calculations, eating his damper, and sipping on his Burpees. Cooked it a little bit too much on top. I have to say I'm more used to making this sort of bread in cold countries, and the temperature is way up in the 30s, so even allowing for that, I haven't allowed enough. Just going to turn it around because the wind's blowing this way, make sure it's properly cooked in the middle on that side, and time to get some tea on, I think. I'm going to add one other special ingredient from my friend Rick. The gum leaves in, give it that unique Aussie flavour. Rick has travelled the outback many times in pursuit of Stuart's history. I started my journey with him, and as I come to the end of my time here, who better to join me and share a true bushman's meal? Well, let's have some damper, Rick. Smells good. Yeah.
A little bit still actually dirty in the middle. Thanks. I was afraid of burning it.
It's hot, Brian.
Pretty tough diet, wasn't it?
Very tough diet. Must have got pretty sick of it.
Well, it's really special to be here in the Stuart's campsite beside Stuart Creek to eat some damper and to drink Billy tea in recognition of his achievements. Cheers. Cheers. Good health.
This has been a remarkable journey. I had a great admiration for Stuart before I came here, and that has grown enormously. What really brings home the incredible achievement of Stuart and his men is crossing the very terrain he tackled over a century and a half ago. He learned what he needed to survive out here, and this knowledge made it possible for him to become the first European to cross the continent and live to tell the tale. This is such a tough, unrelenting environment. It's really brought home to me how hard and determined he was. He is the one person who revealed more of Central Australia than anyone else. John McDowell Stuart never really fitted into polite society. He was out here in the wildlands that he found himself, his sense of purpose and his confidence. In a strange way, history has kind of passed him by. He's almost forgotten. But not to those people who still live and travel here in the bush. To them, this Scotsman of diminutive stature is remembered as a giant of exploration.
Coming up on BBC Two, braving minus 30-degree temperatures to film a rare Tibetan antelope with wild China next. Then vodka, the Volga, and off-roading in a souped-up camper van. Jonathan Dimbleby's Russia at 10:50.
Australian Aboriginals, there's a tradition of going travelling across the country to visit sacred sites, relatives and friends, to collect wild food and to follow stories. And it's very much in that vein that I've come here to Australia to go walk about. The great thing about the term walkabout is that you can use it to describe almost any sort of journey. So that's just what I'm doing in this series, exploring parts of Australia I've never been to before. And today, I'm in Queensland. People are always asking me whether I've ever met the bush tucker man. Les Higgins presented a series, a hugely popular television series, exploring bush foods and gathering information from Australian Aboriginals. He may come from the other side of the world, but he and I have so much in common. Now we finally get the chance to work together as Les and I take a road trip across his home state of Queensland. It's an opportunity to look at how varied the landscape here is, learn about the tucker on offer, and delve into the history of this part of Australia. We're starting in the rainforest of the Daintree National Park. But first, there's something we've got to get out of the way.
What's the worst thing you've eaten?
I was going to say the same thing. I think Brussels sprout there. What about you? What's your worst thing?
Probably it's a thing called common name is cheese fruit tree or
Morinda.
yeah, Morinda. I call it the dog's paw tree. I think I can get you one.
Yeah, I figured that you might try to do that one. Morinda citrifloia.
Yeah, you won't get it here. It's more coast on the coast. Yeah. I'll tell you about this story about that. I did a sequence of, you know, the great big long mangrove worm.
Oh, yeah, I've eaten that.
Yeah. And it's just like oysters, you know. It's really good.
I like that crab pate.
Yeah.
One that's got a little chili hint to it.
That's right. But I was eating this and it was shown on TV, and I was going up to Cape York there, and the Aboriginal tracker up a place called Laura up in Cape York. He said to me, and he's an English fella, and his wife are English Aboriginal. He said to me, you know that worm you've been eating on TV? And I said, yeah. He said, we've been watching that, eh? I said, oh yeah, good. He said, you know my wife, she just about vomit now.
Well, it's nice to know we're off to the right start. Now it's time to set up camp. One of the great things about travelling by car is you can travel with a bedroll, as they call them in Australia, swags. The traditional way of setting those up is like this, under a tarp of some sort, if there's a chance of rain, particularly where there are insects like mosquitoes and sandflies. All you need is a net with a fine weave like this one. And that will keep out the small creatures like sandflies. That's very important. They can really ruin a trip. Sadly, people coming here on holiday very often will rent this sort of equipment, but end up with a net like this, which is a real cheap one. These are still very commonly found here. They've got a very open weave, and these actually catch more insects than they keep out. You can wake up in the morning being bitten to pieces with all the little creatures that bit you still trapped inside the net. Not a nice experience. Always clear the ground where you're going to put up your flag. Beneath it can be a place where you find scorpions, ants that can bite, and other nasties. For this swag, I'm going to need 2 trees, about that distance apart. It will be perfect. You can use poles. The trees do the job admirably well. Tie that up there. I like to tie that with an adjustable knot. Same again at this end. Little adjustable knot. Just need to get the tension right. Something like that. Now what I like about this is the tightness of the mesh. Let me show you. You can hardly see through it. I could set it like that and put a big tarp over the top, which would be ideal. But it does actually come with its own tarp. The great advantage of a swag is it comes already ready. You've got your mattress, sheets, a sleeping bag or blanket, and even a pillow, all ready and comfortable, which, frankly, at the end of a long, hard day's driving, is brilliant. I like to take the first chance I can to explore, and there's no one who knows this part of Australia better than Les. Within minutes, he's found something for us to eat. Well, I know what this one is. It's very unexpected. I've seen it in the books here.
non-fiction books you've done, and I know that's probably a common, and I've never used one, so what do you do with it?
Okay, well, it's the flesh on the outside of the stone. The stone's inside. I'll show you one of them in a minute. It's a very pitted stone, so just a nibble on the outside of the flesh there.
It's a big stone.
Good stuff. You've got that green sort of dry sort of flesh there, which is a bit sour.
It tastes like hawthorn berries from the UK.
Right, that's it. The purple fruit here, the colour, always reminds me of cattle reds, and they love these things. They eat them all the time. You know. Well, that stone's very interesting. I'll tell you what. There you go. That's what the stone's like when it's all finished.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all sort of pitted and all very, very regular.
Very beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and you can make terrific necklaces and all this. They're very, very ornamental. Yeah. And they're typical rainforest stuff, particularly around this part of the world.
Really interesting. There's real beauty here, but much of it is dangerous, like this, called simply and accurately the giant stinging tree. The rainforest has got a whole host of things you've got to be a bit careful of in it, and this is a real classic. This tree with its big heart-shaped leaves is one you wouldn't use for toilet paper. It's got this fruit on it that looks like raspberry, and I'm told it's edible. I've never actually eaten one. I mix ginger in the way I have worked, so I'll try it. Just very water, I wouldn't bother you. There's no real flavour to it. This is a tree I haven't had a great deal of dealings with. But you know a lot about this thing, you know. So.
Yeah, this has got an awesome reputation, this tree. It's called a giant stinging tree, and all you've got to do is touch those leaves, whether they're green or dead like those ones over there. And they've got these little fine hairs on the surface which go into your skin, and this will continue to sting, not just for a day or 2 days, but up to 6 months.
Oh, you can sting for another month, can't you?
Yeah, because what's going on is that the hairs are penetrating the skin, and the hairs seem to be hollow, which is allowing you to be careful. Which is allowing the hairs on you to shade there is with something that's sort of latex back, basically. We put a triple, there's some coats around here that you can actually get the sack on. Stop the outside to get all the wheels.
There's also signs of animals that are changing. This is a bit, and you can see the incredible thing is how they provide the perfect environment for the scrub and eggs. The birds go to what happens on food standing in feet, when they place that into the ground here, land anywhere, and they can tell what the temperature is because the eggs are buried down below. And they can get around there 33 degrees. It's too hot, they're scratching really hot. Not hot enough, they scratch more than hot. It's incredible because conservationists sometimes, when they try to incubate eggs, struggle to get the conditions just right. And the birds, you know, by evolutionary process, just learn this method. It's fantastic.
Well, because it's how you push that as well. The eggs, every sort of use that. Go to the eggs, because the birds will get out of here. They'll go to the birds and then you get a food. Sometimes birds get out, they'll go to the eggs, get out the whole lot. What they're looking for is the sort of the towel, the shoots that the birds use to dig. And all the eggs, they feel that. They dig it in the ground. Where it would get
Unreal. Your work with the army, that involves going to lots of Aboriginal communities. Well, I moved later on from to army aviation, basically, and
Six. 7. 8. 9. 30. 2. 3. 4. 6. 7. 8. 40. 41. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8.
The depth of his knowledge was self-evident as soon as they started talking. The local Aboriginal people come down here all the time. They come down here to fish and hunts and that sort of thing. And you see them driving down here and they're walking through here and camping in the bush there and they walk through this stuff here. They go to the water lilies and the lotus lilies and look at ankle and itchy. So there's a lot around and they're not into all the bush. They don't offer it for fish for the eels or sometimes you get things like ball snake as well, which you can eat as well. We took a trip along the Roper River to find 2 Swedes that evening. I could tell instantly that he was somewhat driven by the same things as myself. Yeah. It's a K-Rally, it's probably a navigation situation. You gotta watch it because they sort of classify it as the
50. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 60.
May not always be the most convenient to find, but I never tire of gathering what food. It's a great fear of eating something
One.
collected.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 70. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 76.
It's best to find the bush tucker with than the bush tucker now. There's so much for us to learn from each other. Let's get used to these. This is a fungus. We have some very similar stuff growing in Britain. This is the genus Baldinia. They have concentric rings. Some of you see. And this is really useful. You can use this with fire lighting. You know, sparks and this will glow like a charcoal briquette. That's probably about the subject of that share. The more you learn, the more you learn to do it. Oh yeah, look. Kind of size on it.
77, 8, 9, 80, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 90. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.